listening to the podcast Advertising Playbook, your resource to better understand and execute successful podcast ad campaigns.
AJ, welcome to the podcast Advertising Playbook.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So, AJ, you are the head of the podcast network at the Roost, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And we're here at the Sound Summit at South by Southwest.
Yes.
And you gave a talk earlier about the convergence of where we're at in the podcast industry and how being here at South by is so pivotal. Why did you feel like that was an important thing to say?
Well, part of it was I'm from Austin. I've lived here for about 7 years. And in the last 7 years, I've seen just what a special place this is, like in the incubation of podcasting and so many podcasters moving here. I pulled back the camera and said, like, why should we be talking about podcasting at South by? It's because of the natural evolution of South by from its roots in music, moving into TV and film, and then into education, tech, and government. It sort of ran the natural course of Austin's growth. Mm-hmm. And it makes sense to me that so many podcasters have moved to Austin because of the opportunity that the city provides, and that convergence of industry generally leads to more ideas. And the best ideas are generally conveyed through podcasting as a growing medium. And so my presentation earlier was really promoting Austin as a place for podcasters to come to incubate their new ideas, or for media buyers to invest in their advertising dollars in podcasters that are making it happen here. And also just pulling back the camera, it's like find your Austin almost. Like I'm more so talking about like, put yourself into environments where there is that confluence and that diversity of thought, where you challenge your own thinking. And that's how we're going to find the next hit, right? It's like by breaking out of our bubbles, and not that podcasting is any sort of bubble, but like we're going to find our ideas by just pulling back the camera and just exploring new ideas to come up with entirely new ones.
So in this presentation that we just listened to, the stat was shared that while 31% of U.S. consumers are listening to podcasts, only 9% of ad dollars are being invested in podcast advertising. Any thoughts why that might be the case?
Yeah, that's interesting. So like, we're talking about listenership, but I wonder about viewership as well, because like podcasting, it was revealed a few years ago with YouTube being such a growing medium when it comes to distribution of podcasts, and then really taking more ownership over the space and just how much they've done for that. Sorry, forgive me if I'm like speaking out of turn here, but I do wonder, like, if that data captures the whole, equation, it might be that percentage is actually even less when you start to compound the fact that views are making up so much more of podcast consumption. So it's funny. Podcasting is such an intimate medium that advertisers are really getting a bang for their buck when it comes to like putting out you're getting host-read endorsements. You're getting this like personal experience out of it. You're getting just so much more out of it than you can get from really other mediums these days. They're going through their own set of problems right now. And podcasting just is like that little engine that just keeps going and going and going. And we're still the first inning here. We're like, look at me, look at me, look at me. But there's something to be said for, yes, we might be a minimal part of total advertising spending, but I'm so optimistic that that's going to go up over time, because the most critical thing here is like, you really have to put yourself in the consumer's shoes, right, and really see how are they consuming a podcast. And most of them, it's like the host is talking right to them, right? They've got the earbuds in. It is a very personal experience, and that's generally the case. I'm very optimistic that advertising revenue is going to grow in our space, and it's going to finally meet the levels that we've grown to, because I think more and more advertisers are going to just start to better understand that consumer behavior and like what it is that they're doing when they go and listen to a podcast or watch a podcast. It's a very intimate experience. They're hanging on every single word. And that host-read endorsement just goes such a long way, and it's such a better conversion metrics, and it helps that advertiser's ROI, and word spreading. So like, I'm very optimistic that it's going to grow over time.
So one of the things that I think is really interesting is when we talk about podcast listenership, we're looking at that 31%. But as you mentioned, we're not really talking about how video is playing in with YouTube. And so when we combine those two, there's a lot of power, I think, between both of them. I know at the Roost, you guys work a lot with podcasts and also with YouTube. Are most of your clients doing audio and video, or are they totally separate creators?
our podcast network is a video first podcast network.
Which is great to hear. Video first audio.
Well, it's video and audio, right? I just say video first because like our origins has always been in video. It's always been in YouTube. It's funny that like we didn't always over the years, we didn't pay all that much attention to audio because no one else was also caring about our audio either.
Right.
Though we had always been there too. And audio just grew organically over the years. And we just, in our minds, we just wanted to create this, distribute it to wherever it is that you want to consume our content, because we know that podcast consumption is a conditioned behavior. So like, we want you to listen to us on your car ride. We want you to listen to us while you're working out. But we also want you to watch us because there's just half of communication is your body language. And so there's so much more that you're getting when you're watching the video and you're seeing expressions on people's faces and seeing the crazy antics we get into and just generally what's happening. And so, and just that's another touch point just to find better engagement and also for the advertisers so that it creates more real estate for them to want to integrate into our content. So it creates a lot more opportunity on that front. But yeah, generally our network has been like 80% video and the audio has just grown organically with it.
Right.
And we love the video side of it because we're just for the reasons that I gave.
So when you talk about the fact that 80% of your audience is video, are those 80% also, obviously those are your listeners, but are all of your video also doing audio or can they do one or the other?
Usually, every show is different, but usually they go to a platform and they stick to that platform.
Okay.
And you know what? The funnier part is that because historically, like years and years and years ago, we didn't really put that much attention on audio. Typically, we saw audio as a marketing thing to get people over to the video. And the irony in it is it's like today when people look at YouTube and some of the video platforms, they might use it as like a marketing thing to get people to the audio. But what we've learned over the years is like you have to like tailor the content for the platform itself and how people consume content on that platform. And so sometimes we edit things a little bit differently. And so that experience feels a lot more different depending on where you go to us. So like in video, if I have people like wrestling or something or doing something fun or stupid, well, that's something that's not really going to translate to audio. So like we make alterations in there. So, yeah.
So now when we're talking about advertising, how are you choosing where to place your advertisers and how do you integrate those advertisers?
So one, I think it's important to create a diverse mix of products that you can actually offer to an advertiser. The thing that built podcasting is that tried and true host read, producer read, endorsed, right? It's that 60-second ad read. That's what built the foundation of podcasting. When direct response brands decided to come in, that's what built that momentum and helped us out. And it will always be there. So custom host read advertising is definitely like our number one bread and butter. Now, the second piece of that is like programmatic ad revenue, right? What you get from like blind marketplaces and the technology platforms and also the distribution platforms. So whether it's like spam through Megaphone or whether it's YouTube AdSense revenue, you put that into your overall product mix. But I've given a presentation in the past that like from an advertising standpoint, you also want to make sure that you're selling not just the podcast product, but the brand in and of itself and all the possible integrations you have from a 360 macro point of view. So like if you have a live event, if you have even a patronage model where you're able to like offer something exclusive to your paid monthly subscribers or something like that, those are all, that's all fair game. Those are all opportunities to integrate into the brand itself. And the podcast is really just the engine that fuels all the rest of these things that the advertiser could plug into.
And your advertisers are running post-read endorsement ads in audio and on YouTube.
Yeah. And that's the biggest piece of the pie, certainly. But we always try to find like much larger, bigger custom opportunities. So they find more touch points where they can have more just engagement with the fans. So it might be that we do it's not about the podcast, but maybe we do a live stream, a special live stream for 30 minutes where we do Q&A with the fans or something like that. That might not be regular podcast content, but that might be an awesome touch point for advertisers because it's so much more of an intimate experience with fans that they want to get integrated into that.
Right.
And quite frankly, we've pulled our fans and a lot of them love it too. The fans, you might hear some creators say like, people don't like podcast advertising. You hear it
Or
all the
ads,
time.
period, right?
So I'm the guy that sometimes says like, no, they might not like your ads. And I say that very jokingly. And I say that as like, as a way of saying like, you got to make your ads engaging, because when you make them fun, it's a win-win for the advertiser. The fans somewhat enjoy it too. You look at like Bill Burr, who like does really amazing and fantastic ad reads. You can make these fun. And that's what everybody wants. They want to have fun with their ad reads. And we have that freedom in podcasting where we can have fun with it a little bit. So long as they're engaging and so long as they have that strong ROI for the advertiser, fun is at the very heart of it.
So I guess one of the things that I wanted to ask you about as well is, do you see big gaps in the advertising space in podcasting right now? Is there technology that is really needed? Obviously, we're on the heels of big changes that have been made recently to the iOS 17 updates that have really rocked the industry. Are there changes that need to happen to shore up where we're at?
I think when it comes to integrated ads for podcasts that are both have a mix of video and audio, we measure views differently than we do a download. And either the IAB or we need to come to some sort of a consensus in the industry on how do we compound views and downloads into one. Right. So a download, we've decided, right? It's 60 seconds of playback by a unique user within a 24-hour period. On the view side, a view is 30 seconds of playback. There's no other rules beyond that.
And does YouTube just count you automatically as a viewer once you have seen 30 seconds of that video?
That is exactly right.
Okay, so we're just saying these are viewers and we're just counting them. We're assuming that they're getting to that ad.
And different networks are pricing YouTube in the podcast mix in different ways. And so in much the same way where we've asked the IAB to take a look at audio and let's find a baseline metric that advertisers are going to trust and know that this is what we've agreed to. I think we're going to have to do that on the YouTube side. And by the way, like, it can be done. Like, there's been enough work done in digital video well before they started to take a look at audio. So the confluence of the two is now shaking things up in podcasting, that people value YouTube and views in differing ways when it comes to pricing their advertising opportunities.
So one thing that's always been really fascinating to me about trying to take the two and say that they are the same is that people do consume the content so much differently. And when we look at podcasts, stats say that most people listen to about 80% of a podcast episode. If on average, a podcast episode is somewhere between, let's say, 30 and 40 minutes, then that means they're consuming a really large percentage of that content. Whereas if we go to YouTube, the consumption rates are drastically lower, right? I mean, like 5 minutes of content. So I guess one of the things that's hard for me is like when we try to put them together, which I understand that a lot of people are listening to podcasts through YouTube. And now that YouTube has integrated the RSS feed, there is, I'm sure, just going to continue to be a lot more listenership. But how do you, as you said, like, okay, we've got a standard measurement for podcasts. We need that standard measurement for YouTube. How do you distinguish the difference between an audio only listener and a video view?
Wow, that also varies between show, because I also understand your point of view, like, well, what you said about like, they might only listen to 5 minutes of content on YouTube. That is such a true statement, because like, even on YouTube, you can tell that like short form content tends to do so much better than long form content. And YouTube creators have known this for a very long time, since YouTube was kicked off in 2005. You could argue that all the content that was on YouTube way back when, mostly video essay content, was like the most original form of a podcast back then. And it probably just started in a long form fashion, then shortened out over time, because creators are just after that high engagement rate and those premium CPM and just keeping people invested in their content. And so podcasting is going along the ride of where other YouTubers have been before. So like, we're sort of repeating history a little bit.
Just curious, because the way I look at it is the listener on a podcast is super engaged, and that's why there's so much power. I'm not saying that the listener isn't engaged when we're talking about YouTube, but how are we, I guess, distinguishing the difference between the listener? Are we characterizing them differently, or are we just saying they're essentially the same?
Yeah, I think that they're so radically different. And I think you have to look at it from a platform standpoint. Absolutely. Because like, if you look at YouTube, there's so many things trying to catch your attention, right? Whether you're, say, it's a desktop user and has youtube.com pulled up and they're watching their favorite podcast, or maybe it's somebody that has it pulled up on a second monitor while they're doing their homework. We have to look at the consumer and what they're actually doing when they're engaging with the content on the platform of choice, because YouTube has all these different things going on. You got a right sidebar showing you recommended content. You've got a live chat going off. You got comments that you might be going through as like you're watching video. There's just so many, I'm not going to call them distractions, but like eye candy happening, which might lead them in a certain path. And like, I think I don't want to speak out of turn, but like that might be the intended purpose for YouTube, right? Their overall intended purpose is to keep you on the platform for as long as possible. Right. So like if you're moving from content to content to content to content, then that's good for them. And there's no wrong in that. But like, how does a podcaster keep people on YouTube? And I think it's like through understanding just how people consume YouTube. Like, again, like it's going back through some of the biggest YouTube creators out there and how they hypercut certain things just to keep you invested in the content. It might not be that, depending on the audience that you're targeting on YouTube, maybe they don't want something that's long and drawn out and completely breathless and something like that. It might be that you need to just hypercut something, get to the strong points, look at the format. Like, do you need to do like a tease at the very top, bringing back some like the old structuring a TV show so that they know what they're getting when they're getting it. Right. So like you have to like edit it differently in order to keep people engaged on one platform versus another, because in audio, you play that episode, there's nothing else sort of distracting you. It's just you and that show, right? Right. YouTube is a different experience.
Are there other video platforms that are, obviously YouTube is massive, but is there a runner up where video is an important spot to be?
As far as like publicly viewed video, I think there's some like underutilization, things like LinkedIn.
Oh, okay.
Depending on the type of podcast that you have, it might be that LinkedIn could be a great source for you and a subject matter, but that's probably for a slim amount of podcasters out there. But I also think that patronage SVOD is probably a really good thing for people, because one, what we used to do is basically window content. So we would put up our video audio to paid subscribers for a period of time, and then it goes publicly into YouTube. Well, the premium patronage sort of window video is also an opportunity for advertisers as well, because most people go in there not for ad-free content necessarily. It's because they want to engage with the content and they want it before everybody else does. They want to feel ownership and feel more connected to that creator, because they know that their contribution matters to that creator, so they continue to make the content that they love. So they want to feel part of a community of supporters. So like, but all of that, and also one of the points I was trying to make earlier that I now just remembered, like that people love ads. Fans also love those ads, because the good ads, because whenever they see advertising on their favorite show, they're like, oh, good for you. Not in a sarcastic way, but like, I'm happy that you're getting this. I'm happy that other people support you as a listener. Yes. And we see that all the time.
And I think too, don't you feel like audience members are like, oh my gosh, you made it. Like you got to a place where someone is supporting you. Yeah. And I think that like one of the things that is so great about content creators and their followers is that the followers are very invested in that person and invested in their journey. They want to see them succeed. Yeah. And I think that's also why we see, like in some recent studies, that those audience members want to support that content creator. Exactly, and so they're happy to see the ads. Well, AJ, thank you so much for being here with me today. I really appreciate it. I hope that the Sound Summit has been a lot of fun for you, and just look forward to seeing all of the wonderful things you're going to be doing in the podcast industry in years to come.
Thank you so much. I love being in this space. I want to continue to grow it out with everybody else. We have wonderful people that work in podcasting right now. It's such a collaborative environment. I've worked in TV and I've worked in other industries, and podcasting is somewhere where it's just really special, the people that are involved with it, and really playing it out this early in the game and making it into what it currently is today and will continue to be in the future. And big ups to Sounds Profitable for putting together this event, having people who are real thought leaders in the space and helping us as we trudge forward. So it's wonderful. Thank you.
Cameron, welcome to the Podcast Advertising Playbook.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
It's been a minute since you've been on the show, so I'm excited that you're here.
Yes.
And it's really fun that we're live in person at South by Southwest.
Indeed.
So now you're the co-founder of Magellan. For those who don't know, can you tell us just briefly about the company?
Yeah. Magellan AI, we are a podcast media planning and measurement platform. So we work with all partners, brands, agencies, publishers, and help basically folks come in and scale podcasting.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. I feel like the tech has been changing so much recently. What are some of the most important tech updates or advancements that we've had recently in the industry?
Yeah, I think in podcasting, if you think about like 5 years ago, there certainly wasn't the same level of like attribution or tracking that exists today. We and other folks in the market have recently launched like pixel-based attribution tools that help brands and agencies understand like the impact of podcast advertising. Mm-hmm. And so I think the overall theme, like an answer to the question, would be like the new data that's becoming available creates a lot more different kinds of problems. Data always creates both opportunities and challenges because you have to go and understand the data. But yeah, I think it's like ultimately the addition of new data into the ecosystem is really like what I'm most excited about from a technology change perspective. And that's a big part of the reason why, we've invested so much in rolling out like pixel-based attribution as part of our offerings.
Mm-hmm. I think that pixel-based attribution is one of the most significant changes simply because we have this ability to really see results. And in the past, of course, there's nothing wrong with the promo codes and the landing pages and all of those things, but really being able to see that this person has listened to the podcast and then goes to that advertiser's website and makes a purchasing decision really is very, very powerful. How would you say your attribution tracking is different from your competitors?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. So it's interesting. I think from a methodology perspective, we started out trying to make sure that what we were doing was transparent and understandable. Mm-hmm. And in the podcast space, like there are a few different folks out there in attribution specifically, and it's not always clear like who's using what approach. So that's like kind of the number one differentiator for us. On top of that, I think historically, attribution has almost been used as like a punishment tool in some cases. It's like this show isn't performing well enough, so let's cut it, which is an aspect of, again, data creates interesting problems. Mm-hmm. We are thinking about attribution as almost like more of a growth tool, right? So how can we, and have built in some, I think, unique tools in the industry where we take the media planning data that we already had and is already so powerful and used by so many different advertisers, and we marry that up with the performance data that we now collect. And we're able to basically identify shows that you should add in order to increase conversions. Instead of just, again, looking at your list of shows and pruning it, identifying actual shows that you should be going out and contacting through the Magellan platform.
Mm-hmm. So that is fascinating. So essentially what you're doing is you're saying, okay, well, we know we've had attribution tracking on this podcast before, and we know that as an advertiser, you're looking for this, and you're saying, hey, this based on your goals, this show could perform really well for you.
Yeah, and it's even more specific to an actual campaign that like an advertiser has run. So there's a view in our dashboard that looks at an advertiser. Some advertisers care about response rate, some may care about install rate, some may care about purchase rate. And so it's a little bit more tailored to their goals and their experience. And then we look at the shows they're running on and identify shows that would reach similar audiences. And that's ultimately, again, the goal is to drive contacts for those shows so that they get added into the media plan. And then everyone's happy when advertisers grow their spending in the podcast space.
I know that at True Native Media, when we get an email from Magellan, it's always a good day because that means someone wants to advertise on our shows.
Fantastic, yes.
Now, in terms of like looking at your suite of products, do you feel like there's one that's like maybe a more recent tool or something that you're really excited about?
Yeah. So as much as we've added pixel-based attribution, we haven't stood still on some of the media planning tools that we've built. So one of the innovations that we have recently added is getting into a little bit more detail on programmatic. So historically, lots of podcast ads host-read. We love post-read ads. But we certainly have seen an increase in advertisers coming into market and just scaling quickly using programmatic. And we've developed some technology to identify those ads and kind of group that spending separately, because it's usually coming from slightly different sources. Maybe it's coming from a third-party marketplace. So we can highlight when programmatic marketplaces are being activated and flag that on an individual advertiser's campaign, so that it's better intelligence for an advertiser who wants to understand what their competitors are doing. But it's also really good intelligence for a publisher who's like asking the question, well, I see this advertiser added 100 shows. Well, did they just add 100 shows that were host-read? Very different kind of buy than adding 100 shows shows and it's a programmatic run. So if we can help folks filter out like advertisers that are running programmatically if they don't sell that, or filter down to that list if they do sell programmatically, that's ultimately what we're really excited about with that feature.
What I love that you all do every month, and I think a quarter wrap up and an annual wrap up, is the top advertisers in the space. And one of the things that we talk about frequently within our company is, are those companies doing programmatic ads or are they doing host-read ads? Because it's difficult to know. And so it sounds like this technology is going to be able to allow you to potentially even create, these are the top programmatic advertisers and these are the top host-read advertisers.
Yes. Yeah. Every month we put out that top list, and it already incorporates, like, our spend estimates incorporate our best knowledge about like what the pricing of those ads are based on the type of ad as well, whether it was programmatic or run of network or a host-read ad. So it already incorporates that a little bit. But yeah, you're right. This technology would basically allow us to do like some reporting on like what was the actual portion of the dollars that went to programmatic and create that top programmatic advertisers list, which is a great idea.
Yeah. One of the things that I know we've talked about a little bit in conversations, at least that I've had, is that the IAB put out a report. I don't know if it was at the end of 2023. I think it must have been, where they said that branding advertisers had exceeded direct response advertisers. And I have a hard time looking at the top lists that you guys produce, because I always look at your list as the gold standard. I just think you guys do a really good job of measurement. You've got the most insight. And so when I look at that list, I think, I don't believe that that's true. I don't believe brand advertising has exceeded direct response advertising. I'm curious, based on the knowledge that you have and the information you've seen, where would you say we are in terms of like that brand versus DR?
Yeah, it's a great question. And that is actually something we do try to address I would say, at least every 6 months. Usually in our quarterly wrap up, we'll look at a breakout of brand awareness versus direct response. We have seen brand awareness creep up.
Sure.
I think it's certainly like much closer to the 50-50 mark than it has been ever before. But, you know, I think it's interesting because on the direct response side, you're right. Like, the top list is dominated by so many names. When we present our data, we present not just the top spenders, but like movers and shakers who are increasing their spend, primarily because if I were just up there talking about the top advertisers, a lot of times it'd be the same 5, 8, 10. Like, it wouldn't be a very exciting webinar.
True.
So that's why we highlight some different ones. But it is also interesting to see that the brands that are showing up on a repeat basis are also increasing their spend. Like, usually it's when you have like a BetterHelp who's out there and has consistently been in that top 10 advertisers, like, we don't see them sitting still, right? It's not like they're getting to a point and then stopping. We still see them adding new shows and really experimenting with different kinds of content.
That's interesting. And do you find that brand advertisers tend to buy more programmatically than host-read?
It's definitely, we haven't done a breakout yet of programmatic data into brand awareness versus DR. That will come with this new feature set we're rolling out. But anecdotally, I can certainly say that we've seen a lot more, less direct response coming out of that programmatic buying, yeah.
So in terms of thinking about attribution tracking, I feel like it's been such a powerful tool for the industry, but I know there's obviously a lot happening with the cookie, and I've been told that like the cookie isn't necessarily entirely responsible for attribution tracking, but how do you think that kind of the death of the cookie is going to affect attribution tracking?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, it's interesting. I think it's caused a lot of advertisers and folks in the, media ecosystem overall to like really look at which metrics and data points will be available in the future and think about, what if they went away? So I think it's going to cause a lot more changes that we'll see in the next 5 years. But I guess taking a step back to the death of the cookie, ultimately, I actually think it's a good thing for podcasting. And it's a counterintuitive point. Yeah. Like, here's why. And it's because historically it's been so easy to measure, because of cookies, it's so easy to measure spend or conversions from platforms like Facebook. All of a sudden, Facebook is going to be a little bit closer to like what podcasting has been dealing with. Yeah. Podcasting has always been the listening happens on a different device than the conversion. And because the cookie has will be going away, does it like have an impact on podcast measurement? Like, yes, right? There is like an actual impact, but we've been living without cookies for a really long time already in podcast attribution. So I actually think it's hopefully a net positive. That's my positive take. on changing data.
I think that that's a really good perspective, because I think that you are correct. And Tom Webster said earlier in one of the presentations, we all talk about needing all of this data, and then we go, what about like radio and TV? And all these big brands buy those all the time, and we can tell you very little about who listens to those, and still there's a lot of power behind them. I think the challenge always for podcasting has been that we really straddle that digital and offline spot. And so the advertiser wants that information, because they're like, well, hey, if I can get it from these folks over here, how come I can't get it from you? And so I do think that's a really interesting perspective. What are your thoughts about how YouTube is impacting the industry? Do you feel like, as we look at especially maybe some of the tools that you've developed at Magellan, do you think that are those tools translatable to YouTube? Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think anything that drives more listeners to creators is just a good thing overall for the industry. So exciting to see that expansion. From our perspective, the AI and Magellan AI, we are basically historically started out detecting ads within podcast audio. But you just take the word podcast out there. So we're pretty good at detecting ads in audio, which includes YouTube channels and videos. So we do see the technology as portable in that way. And actually is something that we see a lot of advertisers asking for, is more intelligence on YouTube as well as the podcast channels that are out there.
The attribution tracking platforms don't typically work on YouTube though, correct?
Yeah, it's because of the way YouTube is set up and how consumption happens, you're a little bit more limited in terms of the kinds of data that you can capture from that. There are a few ways around it. And so in our attribution platform, we do credit YouTube, and based on all of the ads that we detect as part of an advertiser's media plan. So it's a part of the story that you can tell. Podcasting has a few advantages in the kinds of data that we can capture directly from an RSS feed, but certainly not impossible to add in a viewpoint on how did my YouTube ads perform. And that's one of the things that we bring to the table too.
When you look at the podcast landscape, what are your predictions? What do you think is going to change or happen in the industry? Any ideas?
I'm excited to continue to see more networks form. I think there was a moment where it felt like everything was getting vacuumed up into we're going to have one giant group of networks. And I think what we've seen actually is almost the opposite. And we started to see shows and smaller networks get to the point where they really want to independently form their own sales teams and represent their own voice in the market. So that's a trend that I think we've just started to see emerge again in the last few months is more networks launching around some content that's already successful. So excited to see that continue to grow.
I'm really excited to hear you say that. I haven't heard anybody who has expressed that. So I feel like where you're positioned in the industry, you probably see more of that. So that's good to see and hear about. So awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Cameron.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Podcast Advertising Playbook, your source to a better understanding of the podcast advertising industry.